Welcome to a very special Baptist Press live stream tonight in the wake of today's Dobbs versus the Jackson Health Clinic decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. We've got some great guests tonight. And to start us off, Brent Leatherwood, the acting president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, is going to join us. And we have a very special guest in Tennessee Governor Bill Lee. Brent, take it away.
All right. Thank you for that, Jonathan. Governor, thank you for making the time in the midst of what must be a very busy day on your end. And I've described it as a very hopeful day for America, because past injustices, we've shown the capacity to correct them. So my question to you, sir, is just briefly, what does a monumental day like this mean to you as a state leader, but also as a Christian?
Yeah, thank you, Brent. And thanks for everyone on the call and inviting me to be a part. You know, it is a very hopeful day. It is an opportunity for our country really to move into a new season that is redemptive and that is healing. And we're very hopeful about what the future holds. For me, I ran for governor having never been in political office, but I ran for governor because of things that were on my heart, things that I was compelled to use my life for, issues to use my life for, in hopes that I could use my life and use this position if I were given this position to impact in a positive way the lives of the people in our state, in our country, and frankly, to do things that would honor God in that process. And there are a lot of things that I am very passionate about and very interested in, especially in this job that I have. But this one is probably, and I said that when we signed the pieces of legislation in our state that I brought forth, this was the most important thing that I could do as governor. Roe versus Wade was decided when I was a teenager. I'm in my 60s, and all of my life, and most all of our lives, we have hoped for and prayed for this opportunity for that to be overturned. Not hoping for some legal outcome, but hoping that the lives of unborn children could be saved, hoping that the pain and the injustice would be reconciled, and that there would be real healing. And so this is a very, very important day for people like us who, it's not just celebrating this. There's a wide variety of emotions around this. It's a time for us to understand women in crisis. I served on a crisis pregnancy support center board some 25 years ago, and really came to understand just how complex and how difficult crisis pregnancies are, and how much we need to support and surround the women, and at the same time protect the children. That's what's going to be able to happen in Tennessee and in dozens of states across this nation as a result of this. And it's a really hopeful day, and frankly, just an answer to prayer for a lot of people that have been weighing in and praying for this day and thinking about this subject for a long time. I'll say one other thing. My wife, marched, and she lived in DC as a child and was raised there. Marched in March for Life rallies as a small girl. Her mom would take her to the mall and march. So both of us have long held this as a really important issue in our hearts, and it's a very encouraging day. I said, frankly, it's kind of hard for me to believe it's actually happened.
I know I was expressing to someone earlier, it's really hard to capture all the emotions that we're feeling in this moment. So I'm curious, you lead Tennessee, and Tennessee is by all accounts one of the most pro-life states in the union. And I'm sure, because functionally this Supreme Court decision has given this issue back to the states and for the people to decide, I'm sure you have a lot of colleagues of yours who are governors who are texting you or asking your thoughts. Can you give us a little bit of a peek there? What do those conversations look like right now?
Yeah, I was actually with 5 governors and 3 governor candidates last night. We talked a lot about a lot of issues. Of course, we did not know this was going to happen today, so we didn't realize what we were on the verge of when we talked. But we did talk about this subject, and we in Tennessee, we anticipated this. We hoped for it and prayed for it, but we also took steps to anticipate it. We've known that this would be possible. We were hopeful that it would be possible. And so when I came into office in 19, we passed a piece of legislation that is called the trigger law that you all are probably somewhat familiar with. There's a lot of trigger laws around the country, or there's several anyway. But then we took another step in 2020 because we knew that the court may not entirely overturn Roe versus Wade. In fact, we didn't really expect that would happen this soon. So we implemented a heartbeat a prohibition against abortion upon heartbeat. And then actually it's more complicated than that. It was a piece of legislation actually designed to respond to whatever the Supreme Court however they might rule on future cases, so that we could provide the most protections at whatever possible place we could. I just said to our team when we started putting this together, like, we need to anticipate a variety of options that might come to us, because a child's life will be dependent on our thoughtful anticipation and in constructing law that would respond to that. So we're prepared in Tennessee for what happened, what was released today. And a lot of states do know that. So other governors, other legislatures, they are looking now at what they can do. There are a lot of states that have things in place. There are a lot of states that don't have much at all in place, but likely would be pro-life states, and their legislatures will now look. I think what you'll see are special sessions of the legislature in many states that aren't as prepared, or that didn't have the law that they hope for. So there's a lot of, we're going to see a lot of conversation, and it should be that way. This part of what's happened here is really an understanding that the court decided that it's not theirs to decide, that it really is the states to decide. And that, as we all know, that's the way the Constitution was set up. And this particular issue is not an enumerated right, and it's not defined in the Constitution. Therefore, it goes to the states to decide. So you should have robust conversation around the nation about what individual states are going to do, but we're prepared in Tennessee.
Yes, sir. Governor, just kind of while we're thinking through that, there are a number of states out there that aren't anywhere near Tennessee in terms of protecting life. What words of advice or even encouragement would you have for citizens of those states in order maybe to be a voice for life where they live?
Yeah, I think this, there are folks living in states that are very strongly protecting the ability to have an abortion. Like-minded folks, people that think the way we do, but that find themselves in a state where that's happening. And one of the things that I think is important for all of us to remember as people of faith, as believers, as people who have in our core belief system this understanding that protecting the life of a child is really, we should do everything we can to do that. But at the same time, that this is an opportunity for us to surround those and to serve those and to love those who don't feel that way. That's what these the pro-life clinics, the women's health clinics and like the one that I served on the board, that really recognize that people are in crisis and there's a huge need. We need to look at, and as we have in our state, we need to strengthen our foster care system. We produced we've brought out an initiative called Tennessee Fosters Hope that's really looking hard at the foster care system and how it is that we do better by kids and families in crisis. Our adoption laws need to be all across the country. They need to be streamlined. It needs to be easier. There needs to be a better system for adoption in this state. We just last year expanded our postpartum care for Medicaid moms to 12 months instead of just a couple of months, which is what traditionally is done in Medicaid. And part of that is in anticipation of the needs that people are going to have. This is a very divisive and very passionate, highly impassioned issue, but we have an opportunity, even in states where abortion will continue to be provided. Those of us who think like we do and who believe what we do in our hearts, we have an opportunity to even reach out more, to love, to serve, to focus on those states and the women in crisis in those states, just like we did and have done in our state while we were side by side with abortion providers for all these years. This is an opportunity for us, not just to celebrate, but to understand the concern that others have and to respond accordingly.
And I'm sure that you would agree with the sentiment that while today is certainly a moment for rejoicing, we also need to be very clear-eyed about the work that lies ahead of us in the pro-life movement. Any thoughts you have about that, sir?
Yeah, I think there are spiritual battles that occur in the world every single day, and we recognize that and we know that, and the stakes are really high, and they're eternal, and they're important, and they go beyond just sort of political issues. And this is not going to be done in
Oops, I think we lost the connection with the governor. Is that what you have on your end, Jonathan? Okay. Is he still with us, or did we lose him?
I think unfortunately he's frozen. So.
Oh, okay.
But
all right. Well, we probably need to end it there. We only had him for about 15 minutes because it is an incredibly busy day, as our folks in our audience can imagine, for state leaders like Governor Lee. And so I know that, just speaking as a Tennessean, I'm incredibly grateful for the ways that he navigates very complex relationships with federal officials, as well as demonstrating leadership at the state level. So, Jonathan, with that, I'll turn it back over to you, sir.
Yeah, I wonder if they paid the internet bill over at the residence. I don't know. Maybe that was the issue there. I don't know. So he can call Lee and Company if he needs any.
He is a fiscally conservative governor.
He is. He's got a cap on that. Anyway, but yes, Governor, thank you so much for the time tonight. Joking aside here, but we are blessed to have on with us tonight as well Bart Barber, who is the new president of the Southern Baptist Convention. Bart's been in that role for all of 10 days now. And he is joining us live from his home in Farmersville, Texas. And also joining us tonight, Dana Hall McCain, a new member of the SBC Executive Committee from the great state of Alabama. Dana writes for the AL.com, which is the newspaper coalition down there in Alabama and Birmingham, Montgomery, and Mobile. So Dana, appreciate you being here with us as well. So, we're going to throw it over to you guys and talk a little bit about this, but, Bart, let's start with you. Southern Baptist Convention last week, we passed a resolution number 7, I believe last week, on the anticipation of a historic moment in the pro-life movement. That anticipation became a reality this morning. Can you speak to why this resolution was important and how Southern Baptists care about this issue and how we have cared for this issue all 49 years since the passage of Roe? And Bart is muted, so there we go. Now to go, Bart.
people have dreamed for that. Some people that I would be muted. So I can say that in some ways, really, it was completely mundane because we've adopted resolutions about abortion over and over. The first SBC annual meeting I ever attended was in 1987. I was 17 years old in St. Louis, Missouri. And we adopted a resolution on abortion at that annual meeting. Adrian Rogers was president of the convention. And that resolution was the fifth pro-life resolution that we had adopted since 1980. The conservative resurgence was something very much afoot at that time. And abortion was a big part of that. A resolution that the convention had adopted in 1971 prior to Roe v. Wade was very different from the content that we began to resolve in 1980. But since 1980, we've consistently advocated for the pro-life cause, and that continues up to this last year. So in some ways, you might look and say, well, this was resolution number 25 or so out of ones that we've done just about every other year since 1980. But on the other side, it was really very important because, first of all, the leak had already transpired. And so we knew that a momentous decision of some sort was coming soon for us. And we had an opportunity to speak to that. And it was also important because at this moment when major strides seemed certain to take place, Southern Baptists were also at a point where there was some dissent and discussion about the proper approach to abortion legislation that I think arose to some degree out of the fact that after 20 some odd resolutions and after all of these years of electing presidents who had promised that we were going to reverse Roe v. Wade, it became difficult to hold faith that that was actually going to happen. A lot of people, I think, were restless in the pro-life movement and wondering when we would get across this threshold. And that's what makes today so amazing. Not just the fact that Southern Baptists have prayed for this and worked for this and elected people for this and supported laws for this down through the years, but also because it felt like Lucy was holding the football for us to kick it through the goalposts. And time after time, when we thought, oh, this Supreme Court justice is going to get us there, this president is going to get us there, time after time, it didn't work. And today it did. And so I think it's a time of rejoicing for Southern Baptists, such as you would have after you came to the end of a journey that had many twists and turns and disappointments and hopes for success, finally come to not the final goal, but to a milestone that we had tried to reach and could not for so long.
Yeah. Now, Dana, you served as the vice chair for the resolutions committee this year that passed that as well. And I just was wondering, your take on that resolution and the need for, like Bart mentioned, it wasn't just number 7 this year, it was number 25 over, the last 50 years, basically. You served on the resolutions committee last year that passed a resolution against abortion, and again this year about the anticipation of this moment. What has that been like for you the last couple of years, as far as advocating in this way? I know you advocate on your own in your personal life, but advocating in this way to Southern Baptists and the world really through these resolutions.
Well, first of all, let me apologize for my very glamorous environs here. I'm hiding from a very loud family and even louder dogs. So I apologize for the setting. But to answer your question, Jonathan, it's been an honor to serve Southern Baptists and to sort of engage in helping Southern Baptists express our values around this. So both last year when we spoke to the need for maintaining the Hyde Amendment and how important that was to us as Christians and as pro-life advocates, and again this year when we tried to speak to this particular moment where we felt like we were on the cusp of something so historic, I think what was chief on our minds as a committee was reaffirming with great clarity those things that Bart has alluded to already, that we have been consistent about for 40 years. The fact that life is sacred and it is absolutely worth protecting. And we want to do that, to be obedient to the Lord, and also out of love for our neighbors. And that also that love for neighbor extends to mothers in crisis as well, and a recognition that so many of the women who come to this crossroads where they wrestle with a decision like this are facing circumstances that are heartbreaking. I had an opportunity to speak from the platform in Nashville about this, and what I said to the messengers assembled there that day is so real and important for me, and that is that before I engaged in the regular volunteer work of ministering to those women, I did not understand. I thought I understood, but my life had been one of a lot of blessing, both in terms of the parents that raised me, and the home that I have found myself living in as an adult, where I've had economic security and a godly husband who has protected and served me well, and to encounter women who have lived their entire lives without any of those blessings or assurances or safety nets, and to meet them in the moment of pain where they are on the brink of a life or death decision, and they have to dig deep and find the strength to do the right thing utterly on their own, without a great deal of support, without the safety nets that so many of us know in our everyday lives. It changed my level of compassion for the women engaged in this issue, and heightened my understanding there. So for me, as I came back to the table, to the resolutions room again in 2022, it was even clearer in my mind that we wanted to continue to hold to our dual understanding, that reflecting the gospel to our nation around this issue requires wholeheartedly loving both preborn children and women in need, and that we can do that. We can do that. We can absolutely do that. We just have to have a clear understanding and a commitment to it.
Now, you mentioned
Jonathan,
clarity and a clear understanding there. One of the things that I saw earlier today, one of the news networks had somebody on talking about, and I'm reading a quote here, that this will force unborn children to be born. There's a real lack of clarity and a real misunderstanding of what abortion is, what abortion has become in America. How did we get to this place where that type of sentiment is not just commonplace, but that is like baked into many of those that are really upset today about the ruling?
I think it's evidence, Jonathan, of when you live in a culture that repeats untruths for decades, it does sear the conscience, and it clouds the understanding of fundamental truths. And I think when we see people who are reacting today and are able to say without irony that we're forcing children to be born, their consciences and their understanding are genuinely seared, where they don't have the fundamental understanding that everyone desires to live, and that children deserve. I'm gonna have to let this dog in here, y'all. Come on, George.
We're pro dog as well.
Thank you.
And
That's good to know. That's good to know.
I have to say, I did not think coming into this event that it would be Dana who had animals interrupting her in the background. I for sure thought it was going to be Bart.
Usually Bart has this cornered, and so I'm just trying to get my little piece of that. But no, I think we've got work to do. What statements like that prove to us is that we've got work to do in reinforming and reshaping the culture with truth. Changing laws is a big and a fundamental and a necessary piece of the puzzle here, but creating a culture of life will require us to do far more to destroy some strongholds of untruth that have been set up by the abortion lobby and by some who are working from a secular worldview and just lack understanding of who God is and who we are and how that all works together. But again, I think, through the power of the gospel, it's entirely possible. And I think that's the work that we're called to in this moment.
Now, Brent, we talked to Governor Lee about how this is now a state issue in Tennessee, and he mentioned, what Tennessee has done, to be ready for this moment. The Attorney General of Missouri signed this morning outlawing abortion in Missouri. What's it going to look like to be to fight for life in maybe a state like Texas, Tennessee, Missouri, Alabama, where Dana is, versus California, Vermont, Illinois?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me just revisit that first question real quick, and it'll tie into this. Bart's right. We have had now several dozen resolutions as it relates to abortion, and about a month ago, just preparing for the annual meeting in Anaheim, I just went back and looked through those, and there was a word that was consistent throughout those resolutions, and it was the word unthinkable. And I just think that is a credit to the Baptists who have come before us, because they understand not only do we need to change laws, but we have, as Dana just rightly pointed out, we've got to work on hearts and minds, because just changing laws and getting court decisions as right and needed as those are, we've got to work on truly changing the culture. And so that's what lies ahead for us now at the state level. Today is the biggest pro-life achievement in the history of the pro-life movement. There's no doubt about that. At the same time, this issue is going back to the states, and we're going to have to roll up our sleeves, because now, instead of focusing on Congress or the U.S. Supreme Court, some of our attention is going to have to now be at the local legislature down the road or in our neighborhoods. And so the good news is Southern Baptists are prepared for that. I'm convinced of it. So if you're in a state like Tennessee, or a state like Louisiana or Kentucky, where abortion is now ended because of laws that were put in place ahead of time, that is going to lead to a little bit different conversation than, as you were pointing out, Jonathan, a state like California or Illinois or Vermont. In those states in the former category, now we have done the job of banning abortion. Abortion is effectively ended in those states. Now we truly have to get on with the business of establishing a culture of life. And the good news is, I think our churches, in many respects, they're already leading out in this effort, because they are partnering with local pregnancy clinics. They are supplying those clinics with food and resources to come around those mothers. They are partnering with Baptist Children's Homes and other foster care agencies and organizations that work in the adoption space. And they come around mothers within their congregations to not only give them the emotional support and, some cases, financial support, but the community support that those vulnerable mothers, those anxious fathers, those families in crisis will need. And so that's what's going to, I think, take place in those states. In a state like California, I mean, let's just be honest, right now, before their General Assembly, there is a bill that will effectively allow for infanticide. For our brothers and sisters in California, the pro-life win there may be just ensuring that infanticide is not legally protected. And that's a pro-life win that they will hang their hat on, and rightfully so, because some lives will be saved. And who knows, they keep casting a vision for life. Maybe in a few years down the line, we'll be able to stop abortion after 35 weeks. And maybe after that, further earlier in the pregnancy. That's what it's going to take in some of those states. And I'm just thankful that we have churches in those states that are consistently articulating a view about the sanctity of life. That's where it starts.
Yeah, it does, Brent. And you're right, because this Sunday, pastors across the nation will probably be referencing this in one way or another. Many of them will be, obviously talking about this, what it means in their local church. A lot of them involved in a local crisis pregnancy center, maybe, or even have ministries outside of their church, or, out from their church that do that. So Bart, as a pastor, what does this look like for you as you prepare for Sunday? And what would you encourage other Southern Baptist pastors to do as they prepare for Sunday and to prepare to address this?
I think it's the kind of day that ought to be marked in our worship services. We're going to I'm still going to be preaching what I was going to preach before, but we're going to take some time in the worship service to acknowledge this historic moment. And the notes that we're going to hit are these. First of all, celebration and rejoicing. And not just celebration and rejoicing about this moment, but also thinking about generations ahead of us that made this possible. It's easy for me as president of the Southern Baptist Convention to advocate for a pro-life position because there's really no controversy about that at our annual meeting. But when we look back at, I mentioned Adrian Rogers a moment ago, that first annual meeting that I went to, Richard Land, who was serving, back in those days as head of the Christian Life Commission, later the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. Those guys had to fight to bring the Southern Baptist Convention to a pro-life position. And so we owe a great debt to them. We're going to rejoice and honor those who at that level and at the state level and in our local churches have championed this cause. It's also a day of mourning because we recognize that a number of children have died under the abortionist knife that is far greater than the population of the state that I grew up in. And the death toll has been massive. And we can't celebrate this without some memorial for those who have perished through this, and also some mourning because, Pastor, you probably don't know who it is, but there will be people in your congregation who have a past that includes an abortion, and for them, having come to a point of moral clarity later, looking back on what they've done, this is something that just reopens that wound for them. And so, there's going to be a need for some pastoral sensitivity in this time of mourning and confrontation with the effects of widespread sin. I think there's also a need to, like we've already said, to roll up our sleeves and consider the work that's before us. And I think not only legislative work. In fact, for us here in Texas, there's not much of that because abortion is illegal today in Texas. The law that was in effect before Roe v. Wade was never rescinded. We've reiterated that in our most recent abortion law. The first thing that bill says is that we take note that the laws that were on the books are still on the books in Texas. And our Attorney General reiterated that in a statement today, that abortion is illegal today in the state of Texas. It's important to sound that note, I think, because there have been people who have said, well, if you pass pro-life laws, you thought you were ending abortion, but you're actually making it legal. But there's proof today that they were mistaken, everybody who said that, because in Louisiana, it's illegal today. In Texas, it's illegal today, immediately after the Roe v. Wade decision. And so there's for some places, like you said, there's a lot of legislative work to be done. But in Texas, most of our work is going to be in terms of adapting to a new reality where there are greater needs for us to serve in ministry to foster care and adoptive families, to ministries to low-income families, crisis pregnancy centers. All of those things are going to become much more important because here's the thing. Brent was talking about California and about how in California, just making infanticide illegal, it might be a win there. We know it's a different situation in other states. But the founders of this country expected that differences in law among our states would allow for experimentation and an opportunity to see outcomes. And I think any of us who have had children, we've had that moment where the prospect of having a child scared us to death. And even up to the point where they were born and the doctor comes in, and I just candidly, for both of our children, the moments after they were born, there was some question as to their healthiness that was resolved quickly. But I remember what it was like to sit in that hospital room and think, how has our life just changed? And to have some sense of fear over that. And there are people all across our country today who are feeling a similar fear. But if what I can do is, if in Texas, my congregation is faithful to help people have good outcomes that lead to healthy families, that lead to children who grow up and contribute great things to the world. If we can do that, there's an opportunity for California to look at Texas, the ones that aren't already moving here, to look at Texas and to say, the world has not come to an end in Texas. It's not the Handmaid's Tale in Texas. Women are not deprived of the opportunity to flourish in Texas. Everything we were told would come apart at the seams is not coming apart at the seams in these states that have made abortion illegal. And the only thing different is their children get to live. And so I think that task is in front of First Baptist Farmersville and churches like ours in places where abortion became illegal today, to help show other states that it can happen without the world falling apart.
Yeah. Now, speaking of mothers thriving, one of the post-Roe conversations that will be had and is being had right now, and we had the discussion the past few weeks. We had it last year at the SBC annual meeting. Dana, that is one of persecuting mothers and the criminalization of, or toward mothers who have had an abortion. Now, what are your take on that? What's the right, wrong take on how we should respond in that conversation?
That's a great question. And of course, I have compassion, and I understand I think the origin of that thought process for those who think that they would want to apply the law in such a way that you would ultimately prosecute an abortive mother or a post-abortive mother, and that they would think that that is part of ultimately getting us to a picture of full justice. However, I think as I have prayed through and examined this, both in terms of what we know about criminal justice in America and what we know about the population that is vulnerable to abortion, my fear is that pursuing a pathway like that does not get us to real justice. I think it's one of those pathways that, while well intended, is so fraught with the potential for more kinds of just different kinds of injustice. And again, I go back to the fact that in so many abortion decisions, the woman is not the only decision maker. Many times she is heavily coerced or influenced by a partner, heavily coerced or influenced by a parent who wants very much to make this whole thing go away. And so if I believe that criminal justice were able to hold all the decision makers in these scenarios equally responsible, I might entertain that for a moment. But the idea that that criminal justice would be able to effectively and consistently apply the law in a way that was truly fair there in terms of enacting consequences, it's just not realistic. You ask any district attorney or any criminal law expert, and they'll tell you what's going to happen here is the woman that we in the pro-life community see on TikTok or wherever aggressively doing one of these shout your abortion type things that, so morally offends you that it enrages you, and you think she should be held accountable under the law. She has such a callous disregard, such a wanton disrespect for life. I would be fully in favor of enacting a criminal penalty for her. She's not the woman who will be caught in the dragnet of criminal statutes for abortive mothers. That woman typically has resources that will, first of all, allow her simply to travel to an abortion-friendly state out of the jurisdiction where anything like this would ever befall her. The woman who will be subject to criminal prosecution will be the woman who lives well below the poverty line and does not have access to resources, and also lacks resources for an adequate criminal defense, because I think some believe that, oh yeah, well, the law can handle this, degrees of offense and, culpability of others, like the law can handle this. maybe in a perfect world, but one of the things that is required for that is for the accused woman to be able to afford an adequate legal defense. And the population of women who are most affected by abortion and would be most affected by laws like this are the very ones who would never be able to afford an adequate legal defense that would help the law make an accurate determination, I believe, in her case. So again, I think it's an idea with probably the right heart and a desire for justice that maybe does not take a full view of how such a pursuit can go off the rails and take us to places of, added layers of injustice at our own hand that we would have never wanted to see happen.
Yeah. Now, Brent, the ERLC in its entire existence, basically as the ERLC, at least, previously the Christian Life Commission, and even further back, I think you guys are about 75 years old now. But, for much of the existence of the ERLC, Roe v. Wade has been kind of the law of the land, so to speak, for abortion. Now what for you guys? I mean, it's the biggest piece that you guys, that you advocate for, have been advocating for this day for a long time, under Dr. Land, under Dr. Moore, under your leadership as well. Now what for the ERLC?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to clarify, for 75 years, we've been a cooperative funding partner of the SBC, and we're grateful for that. But that said, I'll return to that in a minute. I think our conversation with officials, it will continue in some ways at the federal level. As a matter of fact, I'll pull from the great work that our new SBC president, Bart Barber, and our vice chair of the Resolutions Committee, Dana McCain, put together with that Resolution 7. And I'll just read here. To continue and increase efforts to serve and support local pregnancy resource centers, pro-life organizations, churches, foster care, and adoptive families doing invaluable and often under-recognized work. And then just before that, calling on federal officials to enact pro-life and pro-family policies that serve and support vulnerable women, children, and families. I mean, that right there sums up exactly what our message is going to be with federal officials in Washington. Now that the issue of abortion is returned to the states, our federal legislators, let's start focusing on ways that we can wrap around these families in crisis. I think that's exactly what we're going to do. And then at the state level, obviously for the various 50 states, we're going to have to contextualize our conversations with them. A conversation with a legislator in Louisiana, for example, it is going to look vastly different than a conversation with a legislator in New Hampshire. And so in some of these cases, we're back to square one in some of these states. And we're going to have to very basically walk through why life is precious and deserves protection by the state in some of these states. And in other states, like Kentucky or Texas or Tennessee, it's going to be more about establishing that culture of life and making sure that, okay, now that we have finished this work with banning abortions, let's make sure that these families are actually moving to a place where this is just not even thinkable, as Baptists have long called for. And let me go back to actually where we started with the cooperative program. I'll give a plug for that. And Jonathan, I said this last year, but I think today shows why our cooperative efforts are so important. Because when you start with our seminaries, equipping pastors with the ability to go to their pulpits and convey the underlying realities of the Imago Dei, that helps power the work of DAM with their family advocacy ministry. And that certainly powers our work at the ERLC, where we can go into courtrooms or Capitol Hill and proclaim a word of life. And that certainly helps propel our missionaries out in the field to go and give the good news that comes from the author of life. And all of that, I think, heartens Southern Baptists in the pews and causes them to want to give more to the cooperative program. So that's how our cooperative efforts all work together. And I'm just so thankful that the SBC has played a huge role in getting us to this day, which is a monumental day. This is a historic day. And what a privilege that we get to live during this day. And also what a privilege to move forward with the work that is ahead of us, the important work that is ahead of us, because now, instead of just focusing on our nation's capital, we're gonna have to focus on 50 state capitals. And it's gonna take all of our churches, all Southern Baptists being in partnership together. And I am hopeful that we can do that, get to a place where abortion is no more and there truly is a national right to life.
Now, Bart and Dana, real quick as we wrap up here, our time is about over. Bart, I asked Brent what's next for the ERLC. From your perspective as a local church pastor, can you share what's next, or what should be the next thought for pastors? And then Dana, your work with crisis pregnancy centers, what's next for them? Like, what does this look like now for them? So Bart, we'll start with you and then go to Dana.
I'm going to own up to my ignorance about something here for just a second. So take note of that. I'm a member of the Southern Baptists of Texas Convention. Our church is affiliated with that state convention here in Texas. We have a Texas ERLC. When I wrote a bill about sexual abuse not long ago, getting that through the legislature, the national ERLC played an indispensable role in that. Also, the Texas ERLC with Ben Wright worked very hard to shepherd that through the legislative process. Do all of our state conventions have something like that?
Many of them do. Brent would know better, but
yeah,
many of them do,
they
but not
don't
all
have something as formal as you all do in Texas, but all of our state convention executives, they've identified ethics leaders and leaders for religious liberty that we continually interact with. So we've got partners on the ground already.
It seems to me that the national ERLC remains very important, as it was in that process that I was engaged in Texas. But also, I think pastors are going to need to look to our state conventions and ask for good, sound organization there to help us work on the grassroots level to accomplish all the things that I've just been talking about. For us here at FBC Farmersville, we have the largest ministry in town, helping people with food and clothing and household supplies and diapers and strollers if they need one, or car seats, that sort of thing. Certainly doubling down into that effort and our partnership with local churches to do that is the kind of thing that's important here as far as next steps go, to make sure that we're meeting those needs. And then I think also in addition to that is just what I just described, making sure that in a partnership with other churches at the state level now, that we can come alongside the national ERLC, learn so much from what they've been doing, obtain their help to coordinate what's happening at the state level, but organize at the state level, particularly in states that still have changes that they need to make to law, to organize at the state level to carry that forward.
And Dana?
So obviously, I sort of speak from the perspective of a person who gets to engage in pro-life work in a very pro-life state. We have a pro-life supermajority in the state legislature in Alabama, and so truly we are supported in all the ways that matter legislatively. And so in terms of our pregnancy resource centers, I think this is just a moment where we can have a tremendous impact as the church by funding those centers like we never have before, resourcing them, and going in there with our own 2 feet and engaging with people. Those heart-to-heart discussions with people in crisis and the opportunity to share the gospel with people in their point of greatest need is such a tremendous opportunity for the kingdom of God and for evangelism, because we know that the gospel is what it is that will ultimately change hearts and minds, that will transform our mindset as a culture to one that is a culture of life. And so I would encourage other Southern Baptists to find that pregnancy resource center in their area and go there tomorrow and say, what can I do? How can I help? If it's as simple as writing a check for their annual fundraising campaign, do that. But if you can do more, also engage in that way as well. I would also say that the way we carry out this work and the way we speak about it in solidly pro-life states has ramifications for other areas of the country where, pro-life advocates don't have the luxury of friendly audiences. So I would just urge other Southern Baptists to prayerfully speak and act and engage with wisdom and with humility and with great love as we go forward in this, so that we don't unintentionally make things harder for our friends in the pro-life community in swing states where these issues are still very much a jump ball, and legislative outcomes could go very much one way or very much another, depending on, like Bart alluded to earlier, what they see actually happening, what the outcomes are in states that have adopted pro-life legislation. How's that working out in Texas? How's that working out in Alabama? And the way we speak about it and talk about it is one of the reflections of those outcomes. So I would just encourage us to go forward with wisdom, with prayer and humility, and keep trusting the Lord to give us the increase that we hope to see.
All right. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Bart. Thank you, Brent. And thank you for joining us tonight. And special thanks to Governor Bill Lee of the great state here in Tennessee. You can visit ERLC.com/Dobbs. That's ERLC.com/Dobbs for a host of resources on this decision, as well as what's next for your church, you and your community, and you and your state. There's an interactive map showing you and telling you about what states, what the abortion laws in each state are now, as well as, like I said, a ton of resources, both for your church and you personally, along with some articles and just a lot of information about today. So again, thank you for joining us. Brent, thank you. Bart, Dana, we really appreciate you taking the time, and especially Governor Bill Lee for giving us a few minutes at the top of the show tonight. And thank you again for joining us today here on BaptistPress.com.